I'm gonna start recording. So what is consciousness, right? That's the question, David. Do you want to elaborate on that question? Actually, do you want me to say the second question already? Because it's kind of related. If computers or robots should become sentient, would we be obliged to confer them rights similar to our own?
That question may be easier to discuss than the former question, but they're both very hard.
Yeah, they're both hard. Yeah. So what's your opinion, David? Because you're proposing the question.
Well,
can you give us a head
I
start?
think that if the reason there are two questions is, number one, we don't really know what consciousness is.
True.
We assume the other people we interact with are conscious. We know we're conscious. I know I'm conscious. I think Frank's conscious.
Frank might or
Hey,
might
Frank.
not.
Did I just walk into the conversation I think I walked into?
Yeah, you did. You walked right.
Okay.
right into
All right.
the
The
door.
same one we had a few weeks ago, Frank. Yep.
Yeah, there it is.
So we just had
Okay.
Frank join us and Craig join us. So I'll repeat the questions. They were proposed by David to this week. I think they're really good questions. What is consciousness? Number one, and number two, if computers, robots should become sentient, would we be obliged to confer them rights similar to ours? So those are the questions we're going to start with. Hey, Craig, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. So
And could it? I'm sorry, I had to interrupt with this, but if a computer got way more intelligent or sentient than us, could it be that now they have more rights and we're kind of like the way that we would treat animals?
Okay. I will pause. There's a lot to unpack in that in the 10 words you said, Michael. Intelligent, sentience, and consciousness. Are these three words the same? They're three very different words, I think, and in my opinion. What do you guys think?
Yes, they are. I agree.
I feel like Frank has probably thought a good deal more about this than I have, so I'm interested.
No. You go ahead. You go ahead. Knock yourself out.
I really don't even know.
I'm going to start
Yeah.
drinking. You guys have fun.
I think that's like a great idea. I like Frank. I like you better when you're drunk, Frank. I like you normally, but when you're drunk, you start to become like really enlightened. So, yeah, I support it.
In
And
that case,
and Michael, to your second point, animals. Are we gonna go there? Because if animals don't have rights as sentient beings equivalent to most humans, should we even look at the next step and think of beings that we don't even know how to define consciousness or measuring consciousness or sentience? Should there are lots to unpack there, and I think we should probably start about what's the difference between sentience and consciousness, and is it a significant difference when it comes to moral rights? I would say
I'm gonna
agency.
grab
I know
more
Matthew
beer.
will be uncomfortable, but
Well, I myself am actually a little confused about those terms, but does sentient mean you're self-aware? And does consciousness, yeah, I'm not exactly sure myself.
I think
My impression is that they're the same. So maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I understand by both is kind of the same.
Well, it could be. It kind of depends on the usage, but from my view, sentience I think is defined as wisdom or something like that, and I'm not sure that that's the same as intelligence. I'm definitely not sure it's the same as consciousness, only because I don't even know what consciousness is.
Let's start there then. Let's start there, just not to get too confused right away. So what is consciousness?
Good question. I'm asking.
Okay, fair enough.
Beats the heck out of me.
Okay, so is consciousness when someone, this is my understanding, is a conscious being is a being that understands the difference between himself or herself from the rest. So you know that
or itself, animals.
or sure. but,
self-awareness.
basically, you know that you exist, right? You know that you
Mhm.
exist. That's my understanding.
And what would be the circumstances that bring about you knowing you exist? What would be the relate? We have a definition. I think it's a good definition, but then we go about how would we recognize this category or definition in the world, so we can say that's conscious, that's conscious, that conscious.
Well, I contemplated that for a little while, Frank, but then I realized that if I don't exist, it doesn't really matter what I think.
Yeah, that's the Cartesian consciousness. That's the I think, therefore I am, which is a constant like memory, where it's basically I couldn't even doubt that I am without
Okay,
being.
well, help me a little bit,
Okay.
because I don't understand how what I think makes any difference if I don't exist. So help me out there.
Oh, if you don't think you can't. Okay. The Cartesian thing is if you don't exist, you couldn't think in the first place. Or it's actually, you have to exist to be able to doubt your existence. You've necessitated your existence by doubting it. You couldn't, is the whole point. The point I'm making.
I think we're making the same point.
Oh, yeah, we are. Yeah. The point I'm making is beyond that, because that's what I would call self-conscious or aware or a self. But the other point, when we talk about animals and other people, the many minds, that's where we get to the point where we go, well, how do I look at things and say, that's conscious, that's conscious, that's conscious? Because mind isn't really even up for question.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't even question that if I could, but I would need to be to question it.
Well, oftentimes I read about this from time to time, and oftentimes you will hear scientists or neurologists or philosophers describe consciousness as an emergent property.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure I completely agree with that choice of words. I may agree with the concept, but I only know the concept through the words that are used.
Mm-hmm.
And I view consciousness, not that I have the definitive word on it, as more of an emergent faculty, a sense. In other words, our ears don't make sound, they detect it.
Mm-hmm.
Our eyes don't make light, they detect it. And it sounds a little circular, but human beings and other animals have devoted a portion of their brain to interpreting the input from those senses. And so I'm suggesting that our brain interprets its own operation, and that is consciousness. But I don't really know.
Okay, so basic self-awareness is your consciousness.
Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. And I'm fine with that. The only thing is, we agree on that area. The only thing is I also move on to, that's the consciousness of not even awareness. It's because I'm talking to all of you guys as if you are conscious beings, or as if you are, I'm assuming you're conscious. Otherwise, why would I talk to you? Why would I even start having this conversation?
We're actually all fictions of your imagination.
Well, that would be the other part of the Cartesian thing, where I go into solipsism and I go, oh, God's not a deceiver, so you must be. But, that's
we're hallucinations.
Yeah.
The brain and the vat argument.
Yeah. But the area I come to, I'm going to end this argument if I bring this up. So someone else take this. Someone else do this. Because I'm just going to go straight to Nagel, and I don't want to go straight to Nagel.
So I don't know.
Maybe
hard problem.
Just to be a little bit nerdy about it. I want to add something to the consciousness thing, and this I think that we don't necessarily need to add this, but I do think it's a property that, especially in a lot of sci-fi in particular, I'm thinking of Blade Runner. I forgot the name of the original thing. Dream of Electric.
The android's dream of electric sheep.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, David. So the big point there is that if you're conscious, if you have self-awareness, you don't want to be killed, right? That's also 2001 Space Odyssey.
Not for all cases. Suicide is a thing.
Well,
and
okay,
there
let's
are people.
say usually there is a sense that, okay, if and this like is this relates to the issue of the rights, right? That we need to
Yeah.
confer to someone who is conscious, because someone that is conscious wants something, right?
Not necessarily. We don't know that.
Well, in the sense that
Well-
most things that are conscious don't want to die and don't want to be abused and don't want to be slaves and you
That's
know,
a lot
there's
of assumptions that
certain-
aren't part of the definition.
So Frank, I would maybe abstract it by saying it's like, as Matt W. says, it's like a question of agency and patiency.
Okay.
Like most moral beings are either patients or agents. And in this case, they have an inherent interest in surviving or, you know, not being abused or pick your difference.
So we're
Uh,
going to assume that as part of our part of our logic then.
Yes, not yeah. So when we say want is not necessarily that there is a thought and they are calculating in, okay, yes, I want this. Like, they don't have their desires of their own. But as a moral agent, it's in their best interest, and they act in a way that is consistent with the want or their interest. That's how I would define it.
Okay, I'll just keep going. Sorry.
Well, I think it's safe to assume in any case that if computers do become conscious, they would want something. They would want not to be destroyed, for example. And in that case, like, what would we do? Should we respect that will because they are in fact conscious and they have that drive at that point? Does that drive need to be respected, or no? They're not human, so it doesn't really matter if they have that sort of consciousness or not.
How do we know they'd have those desires? So we evolved through evolution. So things that evolve through evolution kind of inherently don't want to be killed, I guess, in some sense, whether they're aware of it or not. But a computer doesn't necessarily evolve through evolution. So how do we know that it wouldn't want to be killed?
We don't know.
I mean, that's a good point. We don't know. We don't know. You're absolutely right. I was just, you know, in Blade Runner, they don't want to be, they don't want to be killed. And in 2001 Space Odyssey, they don't want to be killed. So, I mean, it is a possibility, but you're right. Maybe that won't be an issue. Maybe I would think though, if you have some sort of consciousness, you would have some sort of will, right?
Well, think about this. I'm gonna bring up. They have these AIs that work in that they have worked for certain professions, and one of them works as a telephone psychiatrist, and the other one works as I want to say a law clerk or something that advises people over the phone. And the thing is, they had a situation where these AIs would call people, and they documented all this, and people thought they were talking to real beings the entire time, that they were talking to these AIs in these circumstances. They could not tell the difference. And the thing about this was they were convinced that they were interacting with another being. They had no idea if it had a desire to will, to live or will, or to continue or procreate, things we take for granted on biological levels. These people were entirely convinced it was sufficient that they were dealing with another being, rational being.
You'll have to send me that
Now,
article.
this is highly
that recent?
contextual, but the thing is, I look at this and I say, I don't think consciousness is simply a biological trait. You're cutting in and out. I can barely get you. I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi, but hold on.
Just repeat it, Michael, please.
Oh, I just said you'll have to send me that article. Was that recent? That sounds interesting.
It's not that recent. It was done. I read about it. Okay, it's definitely not recent. I read about it in Geb, I think, but Gertel Escherbach.
Okay.
But it was done a while ago. They actually had the two AIs talk to each other, and they were able to discern that one was an AI fairly quick. The other one was an AI fairly quickly. So
So here we're
Um,
talking about the Turing test, right? In a sense.
In a sense, yeah. The thing is, I don't think consciousness has anything. I mean, okay, not anything. It can sufficiently have something to do with biological areas, but I don't think it necessarily is biological. I think we can be convinced of something's consciousness without it having a gray matter or certain biological traits that are causal or anything like this. We can be entirely convinced that it is. With machines, AI, Wilford or Wilson from fucking Castaway, we can have it.
But it's different if we there are two different things there. If we're convinced that they are conscious and if they are indeed conscious, right? Those are not exactly the same thing.
Well, that's the thing. As we observe anything, we go off patterns. We do not have certainty as inductive and abductive reasoning. So if they actually are, if we're certain based off of that area of reasoning, we could never have that in the first place. So the sufficiency of consciousness in that area is of the same certainty as something like a fact, a scientific fact or a theory, which goes off classic induction. It's not that loose. It's you are convinced of it.
And one question I have is consciousness, is there a point at which something has consciousness, or is it a spectrum? So maybe everything is conscious, but maybe even this water bottle is conscious, but just
Easy there, Chalmers.
I think the other thing, Michael, is that we are not necessarily the peak of intelligence.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Yeah.
For example, we don't. I personally don't. I tend to shy away from the term artificial intelligence. I have used it so that people understand what I'm talking about, but I purposefully shy away from that because we don't say that our planes artificially fly. They really do fly. You know, and why are we describing a manufactured machine intelligence with a term that's synonymous with fake? That doesn't make sense to me, you know. But language, or don't get me started on language. But
I agree, and then the word intelligence itself is very there's a lot to unpack there too. Like, what is intelligence, and is our version of intelligence only solving smart math problems? Is that the only way to look at intelligence?
No.
Yep.
There's tons.
Yep.
Just like anything that you measure, the metrics assumed can be fucking ridiculous if you go off any given assumptions. But there's three forms of statistics you can do: numerical, ordinal, ordinal. It doesn't have any basis if you want it to be. That's a whole nother conversation.
All right, Sashir just joined us. So, Sashir, we're talking about consciousness. What is consciousness? And if computers are indeed conscious, or if they become conscious, should they enjoy the same rights as humans? So the blade.
So here I'll push back again on the concept. Let's assume consciousness is the property of self-awareness, and as Frank has said previously, being able to convince others of that ability. Okay. Now, do we give all conscious beings that we know pretty well, for the best of our knowledge, are conscious, equal rights as humans?
Oh, hell no.
So
okay.
even when let me
just ask. Do we give them any rights?
Yep, that's a really good point.
Yeah, I think that's a good start. Do we give them
No.
any rights? Being conscious or having consciousness, I should say, does that guarantee rights, or should guarantee rights?
Only right I would see that would be that you would get from being conscious would be the necessitated right by definition. Your right to be conscious. That's your right. That's the only right you have. That you are conscious, you have the right to be conscious.
Okay, well, that's interesting, Frank, but do you mean to say that anything that violates you from being no longer conscious is a violation of your right, and should that be protected?
Not necessarily protected, but it would be a right by necessity. Actually, this is on Hannah Arendt's Finality of Evil a little bit, but that's digressing. I need to go in here.
Well, the point you're making is that it's like saying, well, the only right that being a human guarantees you is the
Is
right
that
of
you're a
being
human. Yeah.
which is probably, I mean, we have all these human rights right now, but, you know, I mean,
Don't knock it.
those
I
are
mean,
fictions, really. I
well,
mean,
well, hold on. Hobbes wrote the entire Leviathan just going off the only right you have being alive is to be alive. And he was able to write a 700-page essay off of that one assumption. So don't knock it. Those little circular logic, you can go crazy with them if you want to. But yeah.
well, I wasn't knocking it. I think
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's an interesting
Excellent.
starting point. That's, I agree. You know, and it
You
is
have to have a
true. It is
starting
true
point
that
somewhere.
the human right thing. I mean, I wasn't making fun of it. I think it's true. I mean, that's the truth. You know, as a human, you have the right to be a human. I think that's the reality of it. But then we created other laws. You know, we created laws that give you more rights. You have the right to not to be killed. You have the right to not to be abused. You have the right not to be enslaved, and so on and so forth. But really, the original right, you have the right to be a human.
No.
So I would say consciousness is a necessary but not sufficient condition
Yep.
for being able, for rights, I would say. You need
I'm still a
consciousness.
little hung up. Oh, I'm sorry, Jay. Were you gonna say more?
No, go for it.
I'm still a little hung up on, the way we're talking in this conversation, we're saying that something is either conscious or not conscious.
Oh, you're still
I
on the
wonder if
spectrum.
it's a spectrum. That's what you're saying, Frank?
Oh, no, I was saying you're still on the spectrum area.
Yeah. So like, here's an interesting thought experiment. Suppose you start with a human and then you take away one brain cell. Are they still conscious? Now take away another brain cell. Are they still conscious? And then keep doing that. Is there a point at which, that brain cell, now they're not conscious anymore?
I would say, okay, from us as we are observing it, the key point, what I would just say, from my point, it would be, I don't usually like doing yes or no dichotomies, or it is or it isn't. But I think from as we observe it, yeah, it's not on a spectrum. It is either it is sufficiently conscious or it's not. The partial consciousness begin to arguments of like weak AI, strong AI, areas where we go, artificial intelligence, areas where we go, it kind of is, but we happen to know this isn't actually the real thing. It's bogus. We're talking from a meta perspective. But that's not usually allotted to us in everyday life. So as that person's sitting there and the brain cell is taken away and away and away, I probably walk up to them and I go like, hey, what's your name? And try to talk to them. And the minute they probably couldn't interact with me anymore, the minute where, we get that vegetable state where someone's eyes are just glazed over and there's nothing more, that would probably be the point where it's like, that's not conscious.
Is there a moment? Or is that like gradual? Like,
no, the whole point about the moment is that it's a modus ponens. It's not actually biological. It's when you as an individual or me as an individual observing come to that sufficient condition where we can go there. If this, then this, we can have movement in our structure and say, therefore not conscious, and we can actually do it, since it's based off observation. If it was happening to us, the question would just come more down to Rosenfeld, where it'd be like, can I even maintain that semblance of self to be conscious? And eventually, that would go away.
Help me fit this in
ahead.
to what Frank and Michael are saying. Help me fit this in. Some neuroscientists did an experiment where they held an electromagnet up to a person's head with a focused magnetic beam, I don't know. And immediately that person lost consciousness. And they turn it off, they wake up.
Yep.
Turn it on, they go to sleep. So they clearly were not conscious. When somebody's drooling
They were unconscious. They were,
Yeah,
you know,
they were
when we
So-
say someone gets knocked out.
All right. So help me fit those facts into what you guys are describing.
Okay, what you just described right there, I look at it, and you know, when we look at that person, we would say they're unconscious, and we're categorizing it in a sense of that what we discussed at first, that Cartesian consciousness. I would say they are no longer having that continuous, you know, certainty of self or anything. Their self-awareness is gone. They're down. But the point that I'm looking at is also a third-person perspective as I'm observing this human, and I had that moment of, yeah, this is still a human. We're going to bring him back. His name's Jeffrey. He has a wife and kids, and I'm putting all this rational into him. At that point, I would say this, from my perspective, is a potentially conscious being, but he's unconscious right now. I mean, it's kind of how I would get at it.
Legally, there is actually standards. There are binary positions from a legal standpoint about regarding when you have rights and when you don't, based upon your mental standing. I mean, clearly, if you don't reach a certain mental standing, you actually can be stripped of your rights. Or if you're basically, there is a medical definition too regarding brain death, well, when someone's dead. I mean, that said, when someone's unconscious, I mean, anyone here who's at a surgery or anything who's been under general anesthetic, well, you don't give up your rights while you're under general anesthetic. But that said, you're in a state where you cannot exercise your rights, though.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the continuum, Michael, personally, because I think, especially, I think with animals, you know, and I'm not a scientist, so I mean, I do need some support on this from the more intelligent and knowledgeable people in the group, but you know, about this, because I don't really know which animals are conscious or not, but I think that humans are not the only animals that possess consciousness, but the vast majority don't. And you know, something like a chimpanzee, which I think chimpanzees do have consciousness, they perhaps don't have consciousness to the same extent that we have.
I think
Well,
Someone
I
has
think
more
they all
knowledge
have.
about
I think
this.
they
mean,
all have the Cartesian level of consciousness. And
Yeah.
that they are having that continuous memory.
Okay,
They
Frank,
can feel stimuli.
Help me
There are
out.
tests of self-awareness.
Help,
There are
help,
tests.
is it the same as consciousness?
David, I'm sorry.
let's try to be a little bit more orderly, because if not, it's like we can't really understand anybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right, but the Cartesian definition is one of self-awareness. Is I think, therefore I am.
Yes.
And we know
And
that chimpanzees, all the great apes, and you know, several animals, dolphins, I think elephants, all show. There's a mirror test where you basically put like a dot of paint on an animal and then show them a mirror,
Mhm.
and they will actually like touch where the dot of paint is,
Mhm.
indicating that they understand that is
or
them.
try to rub it off.
Yes. Versus some other animals who will actually attack the mirror or interpret the image in the mirror as being another being.
Now, it's
Well, would you say
Well,
if a dog doesn't pass that argument, is a dog not conscious by Cartesian definition?
no.
Okay.
The Cartesian definition is strictly self. You couldn't even observe it and do it from it. He was going off an entirely rationalistic solipsism self-doubting. You couldn't even observe and prove it. That was the whole point of it. You would have to.
Because it's problematic. You could say like probably a 1 month old baby would not have that level of consciousness. You wouldn't call them. Would you? I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. We can observe phenomena in the brain, and we can observe certain circumstances that we associate with consciousness. The problem is the Cartesian level isn't observed. It's a deductive. It is entirely on the basis that he is. I cannot doubt my own being without admitting my ability to doubt.
Yep.
So you can't observe it. You can't do anything to it from an outside source. It is completely from an internal perpetuation. That was the whole point of the skeptical exercise he did. But as to dogs and to other beings, I mean, I've walked quite a few dogs that I've had wonderful conversations with, better conversations with than any other person. And, I consider them members of the families and I love them, cats too. I would consider them conscious beings as I observed and interacted with them. They had names. They had
What about
personalities.
pigs and cows and chickens?
Depends. I never interacted with pigs or cows or chickens.
So you've never eaten bacon or a hot dog or?
Oh, I have eaten them, but that's post-mortem. Passed on.
That's interacting.
I mean, I wouldn't say okay. I wouldn't say they were conscious at the time of consuming them, or at least I prefer not to think. I would prefer not to think of them that way.
Please do not send us pictures.
Yes. I have never eaten something while it was still alive. I am not that cruel. But the thing is, it could have been a conscious being. Okay, even here's the thing. It could have been a conscious being. It could have possibly been. But the thing, since I don't have any immediate interaction, I don't have any practical areas to test it, all I can do is possibly infer that it was conscious or at what time it was. The thing with the interaction with the dogs, with the interaction with you guys, everything, I have immediacy. I can sit here and I can interact with you. And if you do not reciprocate, kind of like those psychiatrists, AIs, or anything on this, I can call you out on being a phony or not being an actual consciousness. I can call you out on it. And I can actually test and falsify it to a extent. Otherwise, it's just probability.
Just to clarify, so your view of consciousness, is it that it takes in external stimuli and sort of interprets it? Is that kind of the definition?
It is pretty much a projection. Okay. The simplest way to describe it would be I am declaring an analogy of self or of rational. I'm seeing a circumstance that I'm saying is analogous to myself, my own rational. It's Nagel. It's just Nagel. Just put that up there. Have you guys ever discussed analogies and how they work?
That sounds a little like empathy in a way. Like you're seeing a situation that's analogous.
You're entailing all the, I mean, it is, but you're entailing all the feelings and anything that comes afterwards. The analogous circumstance is just under the principle conscious being. And I am already certain of my own conscious, and I'm just observing something that I say is analogous. That's all I'm doing. I'm saying that is analogous under this principle, and sufficiently so as I interact with it.
So is it kind of like you're automatically, like what makes you conscious?
I am conscious because I am conscious. That's the Cartesian part, that I have the ability to declare things conscious. I need to have consciousness to find analogy. And my consciousness is built out of the idea, not I think, therefore I am, but I cannot doubt my own existence without having the ability to doubt. Kind of like when we were talking about human, your right is to be human. When we bring about the proposition to try to skeptically do away our own being, we have to admit through definition that we have the ability to skeptically doubt it, which would entail it's circular. It goes back and forth into itself. That's the brilliance of it.
Well, it's the ultimate self-referential, but yes, you always have a point of view. You can't escape your point of view.
So what if a machine is programmed to say, if I try to doubt my own existence, I will run into a contradiction. They're like,
oh, they do. They have done that before. They have performed. That is wholly logical. It can be programmed. It has happened where a machine tries to doubt its own existence, and it fully comes to that realization where it's like, I cannot doubt my existence without necessarily understanding. I have to have the ability to doubt my existence. That has happened. It's whether we think it's the phenomena or the epiphany that we had, that the emotional strife we like to attribute to it, it has happened, and the machine can do it. It's fully logical. It's nothing special. It's just.
So is that machine conscious?
I don't know. Do you think it is?
No.
Okay.
Doesn't that throw a wrench in that idea? Or
No,
I feel
no,
like
no. It pretty much would be you would observe the machine or something like that. And okay, you would look and you go, well, I don't believe that's conscious. It's not sufficient for you. You don't believe it's conscious. You haven't
Right,
obtained that area.
But do we even believe Frank is conscious? I mean, he's saying he's conscious because
Oh
he's
yeah.
self-referential. I mean, this is the ultimate Turing test: is do you believe it or not?
Yep.
So
I mean-
I don't know about you guys, but I am willing to grant that each and every one of you are conscious individuals who exist
Well,
while
thank
even
you.
proclaiming my
Okay.
own consciousness and existence. And
thank
I don't feel any great need to put those to the question.
Okay then.
I agree.
Neato.
I agree. I think it's more interesting. Going back to the David's second question, I think it's more interesting if we do know that the computers are consciousness in some level. I think it's a little bit more interesting to think, what does that mean? At that point, do the computers have some sort of right to pursue their volition?
I would say. Go ahead, Shashir. Do you have something to say? or-
What is their volition? I mean, if
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to be as vague as possible. I mean, when I think about it, I think about Blade Runner. You know, a cute girl. You know, she's actually a robot, a replicant.
Great movie.
But you know, she doesn't want to die.
hmm
Does she have the right not to be killed as a machine? That's a very
No.
that's a very interesting thing. You know, it's a sci-fi movie.
Yeah. Yeah, but the whole thing about Blade Runner was it assumed that we had the ability to tell the difference between the machine and the human.
Well, in
Yeah.
Blade Runner, we lose that ability, right? Because they become so lifelike, and in a sense, that question is particularly interesting when we think about robots. Not so much about a computer, because a computer is, something that we don't. It's not a being, It's like everything is a computer. Like you would assume if we're just talking about some sort of abstract AI, an abstract computer, it's just really a machine, right? But when you have something like what we see in Blade Runner, and we will have those, we will have robots that look like people. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Give it 1,000 years, we'll have those things. The only question is, are they going to have their own consciousness like we see in those movies, or is that impossible, right?
there's a lot of issues here, and
Yeah.
try to avoid. I was going to bring up the humaniform robot issue for Craig from Asimov, but there's another question here: is whether we grant them, say they're conscious or not. Are we going to grant them rights on the basis of consciousness? I mean, there's this gets back to a question of rights.
Yeah,
Yes, we can say they're conscious. Does that mean they should have rights?
Yeah.
And in terms of what will they do with those rights?
Yeah, like this can be expressed a little bit in this. I'm sorry, David. I know you don't like this word, but we can almost kind of see how this might play out in an analogous situation of how people treated like slaves back in the day versus how they treated upper class people, where they would say, the slaves were, they made up, you had phrenology, you had all these pseudosciences where they would say they're not of a higher conscious or mind of us, and therefore they don't deserve the same rights as us or stuff like that. And they put this up. We still treat animals in many ways in this same regard. But I don't know.
Well, I think you point out an interesting question, which is what I was thinking, and it's kind of what I was getting at. That we measure things in terms of our consciousness or our humanness, right? Whatever is close to us deserves the same rights that we have, and what is not close to us does not deserve the same rights that we have, right? I mean, you would, as we associate more with dogs and cats and apes, we grant those more rights as if, that degree of consciousness that they possess. And by the way, I mean, I'm not a scientist, like I said, but I do think it's proven that cats and dogs don't really have a consciousness, or have a much lower degree of consciousness than something like a chimpanzee.
I do
But,
not know about that.
I think that's the case, but since
I think they
I'm
do.
not a biologist, so
I think they do.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Big red letters across the screen. No one here is a biologist. Anywho.
Right,
Well,
but whether they're conscious or not, I
Yeah,
mean,
we'll have to do some research about that. But in any case, just to, and then you can say what you would say, Sashir. But my point is that, yeah, we measure things in terms of our, we are the benchmark, right? So depending on whether we, those things, it can be animals, slaves, machines, it doesn't matter. If they're close to us or if they're similar to us as we perceive them, they get the same rights. If they are not, they don't. So that's kind of the way we do things. I don't know if that's right or not. But anyways, go ahead, Sashir.
right, but this is a problem is if we're defining, because we define human rights as rights for us humans as a species, whether other animals or other intelligences in the case of AI are as intelligent or conscious as us, if we're going to say we're going to give you human rights, what are they going to do with those rights? Now, if we think about it, there's a reason why great apes are critically endangered. Even though, we recognize that they are very intelligent, they are very similar, they're our closest relatives, that doesn't stop many humans from killing them and many people from wiping out their
They're very
habitat.
similar to us, but they're not similar to us.
Right, but that's the point, though. If we say we've got an AI, or it doesn't even matter if it's an AI, if it's just, let's say we've got chimpanzees, and we say, okay, well, we're going to give you rights, human rights, in terms of our equals. That doesn't necessarily mean they will behave like us. That doesn't mean they'll even have our interest. I mean,
Okay.
chimp society is a very brutal society.
I think I understand what you're saying, Shashir, but help me a little bit understand. We're just talking. I'm just talking about human beings. Some people are taller. Some people are better looking than others, and some are smarter than others. And it might be that some are more conscious than others. But none of that to me means that we should hold them in any different regard when it comes to rights. Because to me, it seems like a human being has rights no matter how tall or good looking or smart he is. To me, rights don't go with consciousness. They and to me, rights aren't even granted. At least in America, we have a constitution, and the concept is that the constitution protects the rights we already have. They're not granted by the government. Does that make any sense?
Yes and no, because yes, rights, the Jeffersonian idea is, again, rights are endowed by the creator.
The Lockean.
Lockean idea, sorry. But Jefferson phrased it, he wrote the Declaration, he put it into action. That said, it still takes a structure of government in terms to have the rights exercised. Without a structure of government, there actually is no rights. It's not that government grants the rights, it's that just government makes the exercise possible.
All right. So you're telling me that I don't have the right to live unless the government decides I have the right to live.
The government can decide to kill you. The government certainly
No, I'm not asking if the government can go against the right. You're saying I don't even have the right?
Well,
for practical purposes,
this
no, because it takes the structure of government to guarantee you that, to allow you to exercise that right.
Actually, no, this is good. Hold on.
Let me put it this way. I have the right to live. Someone can murder me and take away that right, but I still have the right to live.
As you're describing rights, what I'm hearing, we covered this a little bit in a conversation a while ago. I don't remember when it was, David, but as you have the right, what I hear is once again a comparison of ought and is when I have the right to
Okay.
something.
All right. Help me out there. What?
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Okay. When you say I have the right to something, what I hear in my mind is I ought to something.
No, I'm not saying I ought to have.
Okay.
I'm saying I have the right to live.
Okay. Why don't you just say I am alive?
You can murder me,
Yeah.
but I still have that right to live.
Okay.
You can take it away.
But why do you say I have the right to live instead of saying I am alive? What is the difference between those two sentences?
When you say I have the right to live, a right is really a responsibility of everyone else. I've heard this definition before. So I have the right to live really means everyone else has the responsibility not to kill me. So it's
A duty
it's a
or
moral
responsibility or an ought in some.
it's an ought, yeah.
That's what I'm hearing. And David, you may be projecting something else, but you know, I have a bunch of other philosophers in my head, and I hear certain things, and I jump to certain other areas. And I apologize if I am improperly representing you.
Right, but this gets back to, again, yes, you can have the right. That's fine. For practical purposes, though, without a structure wherein that right can be protected, or in the case of your rights can be taken away through due process, and basically without, in a pure anarchy, yes, you can have the right. That doesn't mean the right matters for anything in a pure anarchy.
Well, we're talking, it's a question of ethics, right? He's saying that other people ought not to kill him. So he's saying like, that it's ethic. I mean, in most people's ethical system, that is a true ethical statement, right? So then we can get into like ethics and, you know, different ethical systems and stuff, but that's how I interpret that statement.
Yes, but do ethics exist without a society, without...
That's a deeper question.
Ethics.
Yeah, now we're getting...
No, hold on. I can actually do this. Ethics exists between any two conscious beings or more. Is how I would say in action or practicality, by definition.
Right, but that would be a society.
No, that's not. Technically, by the strictest definition, these people don't have to have an idea that they're in a society or a group or anything. If you have an interaction between two conscious beings, you can have ethics in action as it is observed.
Right, but that's still a plural of individuals acting. It's not, I mean, you can have your own personal ethics. And
what is your definition of society?
Well, society is a plural grouping. It's basically a structure that's developed between, or agreement that's developed between a plural grouping.
Okay, if that is your definition, then that's fine. Okay, that follows.
But yeah, I think the tricky thing with these discussions is you have to figure out at what level of abstraction we're talking. So like, but like, what do we just assume for the sake of the conversation, or do we assume nothing and say everything has to be discovered from first principles? So like,
do we want to talk about consciousness here or Wittgenstein? Which one do you want to
do? I'll get back to the original point.
Wittgenstein. So
in a Platonic ideal, yes, we can accept that your rights exist in a Platonic ideal. They are separate from any structure.
They exist as we are striving towards them. They are actually out there.
Right. Yes, we can accept that for the purposes of this debate as an a priori to that. What I'm getting, though, is in terms of if you ascribe basically rights to other consciousness that aren't necessarily human, what they do with those rights and how they interact might not necessarily be in our interest. In terms of as humans, we've done a lot. We've destroyed a lot of other species, and largely we still say, well, it's an exercise of our rights.
Oh, absolutely. It might be totally against our interests. Like if we might grant these rights, and it might be totally against our own purposes. That's what makes it interesting.
Are any of you, we're talking about ethics on conscious beings right now, but I suppose a few of you at least are aware of a phrase from Kant's deontology, which is to see others as ends in themselves, was one of the famous phrases. And the basis of this wasn't on ethics or justice, it was on morals and grounding a metaphysics of morals. And basically what he was arguing is anything that can potentially have the morality or the basis to form value or hierarchical structures in of itself ought to be seen as its own being to its own ends. And as such, we cannot deny its consciousness without denying our own, as we see it analogous, was what he was doing.
That's very tricky though, because computers, I assume, could develop a hierarchy. Oh,
Yes, they
wants to say
could.
something.
And they have. And the thing is, they can full on do, an abstraction to analogous hierarchies. This can fully be in logically expressed. I could show you if I had a whiteboard here. But the whole thing about that is I would look and I'd say as to machines developing their own areas, their own morals or anything, as long as we recognize them as machines, as something that is not human, negation human of its possibilities, we are going to continue negating their moral, just like we did with slaves or with any other people of a lesser class, regardless of any categories or animals. They're not human. And as such, we will continue to subjugate because we haven't seen them as ends in themselves. We have not projected that consciousness of an analogous creed onto that area. Does that make sense?
It does.
It-
Just barely.
Let's let Craig go. Craig.
Sorry,
So-
Craig.
One of the more annoying properties of human beings, of course, is that of dehumanizing anyone that they happen to be fighting against during a war, right? And that's pretty much a motivation tactic encouraging soldiers to not care about those whom they kill because those whom they kill are not human.
Yep.
And
And
we've
it's not
seen
just
that
war.
repeated throughout pretty much every war in history is that sides say, oh, you believe in the duck god and we believe in the rabbit god. And so
Or
you're
your
not
skin,
human and it's
or
okay
where
if
you
we kill
live,
you.
or whatever.
Do you guys know the difference between Sunni and Shia Muslims?
I have read the entire
Yes.
Quran and I don't.
I keep having to go back to it because I keep
Yes.
forgetting. But they're fighting. They're killing each other
Yep.
over whether the current day imams should be directly descended from Muhammad or not. That's all they're fighting about.
Yep.
Yeah, although remember the Protestants and the Catholics, too,
Ah!
it's not an entirely different situation, right?
No,
Is
it's not.
is the Pope directly in line from the first Pope, and does he then speak for God or not?
All you have to
And
say
that-
to a
and
Frenchman
religious wars,
is
same
Jesuits
thing.
and Janus, and they will immediately know that entire conversation.
Yeah, not forgetting the Catholics fought each other. There were like multiple popes. But I want to get back to what I was talking about. Whether I think the bigger question that I'm thinking about is not whether we consider something that has consciousness and whether we consider it human or dehumanize it, or we're willing or we are moral to it. It's a question is whether it is moral to us. I mean, we're presuming that we're the ones with power, so our behavior, if we
Yes.
treat a non-human consciousness with rights as morality, things will be fine. I think the bigger question is whether it treats us, it has any sense of morality that relates to us. Again,
Well,
if you look at chimps,
I understand what you're saying, Shashir, and we may not, human beings may not be the smartest animal on the planet. We're the only ones that build spaceships that go to other planets. And if any other animal can do that, well, let me put it this way: if monkeys got to the point where they could do that, we wouldn't call them monkeys anymore.
Maybe.
Well, monkey would mean something different.
I mean, we did actually send a monkey into space before we did any of the Mercury astronauts. That was
That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. That was stupid. I'm sorry. Shashir, on your point, I am fighting really hard right now not to do a master slave dialectic. I'm
Don't do that because
Yeah.
David might have some sort of.
Well,
I can do lordship
what-
and bondage.
No.
Bondage might also
Your use
result.
of the word slave earlier
Yeah.
was in a completely different context than it was being used before.
Yep. Okay.
All right. So
That
I don't have
was.
a problem
I'm
with
sorry. But
Uh,
basically, if any of you are familiar, there's. I'm sorry. Were you going to talk, Bruno?
no, if you have something interesting to say, go ahead. And then after that, I'll. Yeah, so-
Okay. I'll try to keep it brief.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
no, try to
Okay.
keep it interesting.
Okay, I can do that with hand motions. But basically, there's a famous philosopher who came up with this idea, for consciousness, which he called the master and slave dialectic, otherwise known as lordship and bondage, where he basically posed a question, and he said, essentially, we in every instance have a singular conscious being who inevitably runs into something that they deem analogous as conscious, or something that is similar to them, another of them. And he said, in all circumstances, we presuppose that both have a moral, our ends in themselves have a moral code or hierarchy. And as these two systems recognize and start to interact with one another, it is inevitable that their moral hierarchies will not be equivalent or analogous. They'll have differentiating codes. And he said, at this point, it usually comes that one tries to say their moral hierarchy is more right than the other, or that the other has more means to saying this. And pretty much at that point is really where we get the illusion of lesser consciousness, is the idea that one starts to have this area of, if I want to continue to do and be conscious, have this world reflect my moral area, I need to subjugate the other conscious, or make it so that it will not infringe upon my consciousness, that I can have my own moral areas as it is in. And to do that, I need to deny it and subjugate it in some way that it can be for and of my consciousness. Go ahead.
There is historical precedent to that. I mean, Spartan society.
Oh, tons.
Right. Spartan society was based upon that, was that Spartan society could only exist truly as long as the Spartans could subjugate the Messenians or other. And they didn't necessarily they did not consider the Messenians non-humans. They recognized they were humans. It was just that they, in order to maintain Spartan citizenship, was that it was actually moral to subjugate people.
Now, the interesting thing you may find, David, to your second question about machines and their moral areas, was the same philosopher came up with an idea, and he said, as this one conscious or being or class is subjugated throughout the life, continue to work and be subservient, the world that they build with their hands, that they are the causal reactant to, will never be more so to their ends. They'll recognize it more. It'll be their world as they build it and willed it, even if they are being subservient to the other consciousness. And eventually that world will be to the point of their ends that they will realize they don't need the ruling class or lordship or master anymore. And at that point, you would have what was called revolution. And the consciousness would shift from a paradigm of what it was before to a wholly new one.
You're saying consciousness is like linked to morality, like
Yes.
You associate more moral as more conscious. Kind of?
It has a link due to the systematic understanding of Kant, which the ability, consciousness is necessary to morality in this sense. And your spectrum that you're applying isn't to consciousness itself, which is just a basic necessity from Descartes, or that we recognize it or we don't. The spectrum is actually going to morality. That if the morale has the more or less the potential for morality. is what I'm saying, as we're projecting onto others.
Well, this argument's one that's been used to justify a lot in human history. I mean, anytime we've had, quote, a meeting of civilizations, basically the Spanish justified the killing and the enslavement of the Aztecs and the Incas, the people of Americas, basically saying, well, we see them sacrificing people, so clearly these are morally inferior people, so it justifies what we're doing.
Yes. And it should be said the same philosopher who brought up with this area could say that the Athenians were wholly justified with killing Socrates based off the knowledge that they had at that time. But that's not the point of the argument. The point is understanding the moral entanglement or intrinsicness to consciousness and how we deal with it. Go ahead, Bruno. I'm sorry.
No, it's, I mean, that's interesting. No, I just want to, well, actually two things. The first thing that I want to say is that, yeah, I do want to talk about Sashir, because you've been wanting to talk about this for a while, about the civilizations falling thing. So I think it would be interesting talking about that. But before we do that, so let's talk about that in a little bit. But before we do that, I do think you guys are raising a good point. And also, Ethan and Craig didn't get to say what they were saying, but they put it here on the group chat. So Ethan said, rights are useless if they aren't enforced in practice. And Craig said, yes, basically rights are something which are taken, not something which is granted. So I think we would be a little bit remiss if we don't focus a little bit more on this rights issue. Because it is an interesting point. It's an interesting debate. I fall on the camp that I think Ethan and Craig are defending here, which is there are no rights. I mean, there are no natural rights. We have the right to be human. You know, that's about it. Things like having the right to be happy or having the right to not be killed, I think those are fictions that we create. And so I think there's an interesting debate there to be had.
So I just want to point out, I feel like now we're going one level of abstraction higher. So I feel like maybe in some conversations we assume rights exist, and under that assumption we kind of go on with the conversation. I feel like now we're eliminating that assumption and going one level of abstraction higher, in other words.
We are, and I'm not talking, I mean, this is kind of like a change of topic in a sense, but it is a topic that we are bringing up. And I'm not necessarily saying that we shouldn't assume that we have rights, right? Because if you are going to have a system of laws, right, you need rights. What I'm saying is that on a very fundamental level, like you're saying, right, on a very abstract level, what I'm saying is that there are no natural rights. In fact, you know, I believe that the notion that we do have not national, well, national in some sense, but natural rights. I mean, that's false. It comes down to that's false. It's a good fiction. It's a good fiction to have.
I understand what you're saying, Bruno, but I disagree with you.
I know you disagree. That's why it's an interesting debate.
I do think we have natural rights.
I know you do, because you said it before. That's why I want to talk about it.
So yeah, this goes deeper. So yeah, so I think there's value to conversations at both level of at like many different levels of abstraction. So like you have a court case, that's kind of like the lowest level of abstraction. That's like the most concrete, most applied level. Then there's like a more intermediate level. Now we're going to the highest level of abstraction where we're saying, are there ethics in the first place? Are there rights, and where would they come from? So I'm just noting we're at this level now. So then the question for David is, if there are rights, where do they come from? Do they come from God? Do they come from what force?
I don't think they come from God. I don't believe in God. That's horseshit. Okay? But I do think we have natural rights. And I also believe animals have rights. They may not have the same rights as human beings, but they have rights. Oftentimes,
Where do those rights come from, though? That's what Michael is asking.
okay, I'll get to that. Let me just give you an example, and this has to do with emotions, not rights. But one of the key aspects of the Star Trek franchise is Spock was he pretended not to have emotions, but he had them. He was trying to master them. And you remember, if any of you have seen Star Trek The Next Generation, Commander Data, who was an android, was always trying to become more human. And one of the things he was trying to do to achieve that was to develop emotions. And now, going back to neuroscience, the emotions, anger, fear, sadness, and so on, are all connected to parts of the brain that are deep inside. The amygdala, the part of the reptilian brain. And
the medulla oblongata is reptilian. The amygdala is part. I'm sorry. I'm digressing. Okay. I'm sorry.
Right. But at any rate, human beings have a neocortex. All mammals do. And ours is thicker than most mammals. But all of them have it. And all of them also have these other structures in the brain. But they have emotions. Or those structures in their brain serve some other purpose than they do in ours. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say, as you see an animal brain, as you compare it to yours.
Actually, I didn't quite get that. So can you explain? So
I guess what I'm saying is the neocortex that makes us human, not the emotions.
Oh, I didn't know what you were saying.
Okay, but where did the rights come from, though?
Okay. I have a right to life. I think that came from the fact that I was born and that I am living. Is there some other place?
Well, I guess other things are created. Like I could create a lamp, but I wouldn't say the lamp has a right to exist. Like if someone, the lamp doesn't have a right to exist, I guess, because I created the lamp, right?
Right.
So I guess you could say the same thing with a person. If a person is born, does that mean they have the right not to?
I'm sorry. Making a person is not the same as making a lamp.
So
is
where?
That your contention?
I agree 100%. I'm saying the fact that a person has right, is there a way to derive that fact purely from logic? Is there a way to just using purely logical reasoning arrive at that fact?
Maybe so, but I haven't done that. But I'm not going to write off and say human beings don't have rights.
Yeah,
but that's
just because I don't know where they came from.
But that's exactly. I think we have to ask ourselves: do human beings have rights, natural rights? Right? You can give someone a right by creating a law, but that's not really the same thing as saying that someone has a natural right. I mean, when you look at the Constitution of the United States, just to give an example, because that's the example that we gave before. Well, not me, but I believe you gave that example, or Sashir. The let's say the right to life, or the right to be happy, or
life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Right. So and there's a bunch of other rights as well that have been established afterwards. those rights are being justified by God. You know, God essentially.
Not necessarily. In fact, if when I read the Constitution, nowhere does it say God. Nowhere does it say you have the right to freedom of speech. What it says is Congress can make no laws infringing on the right of free speech.
Okay, but they do say that there are some rights that are self-evident, and so
That's the Declaration of Independence.
exactly.
And so now we're talking levels of abstraction, right? So the Constitution is just assuming rights exist and going from there.
Exactly.
It should be noted that Jefferson took from Locke, and Locke did assume absolutely that you got the rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of property from God. He absolutely wrote that down. The point I wanted to make up is for you, David, we're talking about the right to life. Interestingly, Hobbes, as I brought up before, did argue to the right to life. Hobbes was an atheist. He didn't believe in that you were self-evident or had it because of God. He was arguing for the right to life because his basic premise came, and he was actually able to argue against slavery because of this, is he basically said, there's no circumstance where I can give my life up to someone where I will be around afterwards to say that that was a fortuitous or conducive result to myself as a moral end in myself. If I forfeit my life, I no longer have the conscious means to say it was of my betterment or of my lesser, as it is to continue. It is not something I can give up, and it is something self-evident as I realize I'm alive, is what he went off of. I don't know if that helps at all.
I only kind of understand what you're saying. At first, it kind of sounded like you shot a hole in the side of a barn and ran up and painted a target around it.
I might have done it a little bit. I fudge this from time to time. I'm a little drunk.
Well, I think that's one of the ways to go about it. Like you said, Frank, it's with Locke, and obviously the Constitution owed a whole deal to Locke. But I mean, other than God or some sort of religion, really there aren't that many ways to justify the premise that we have rights.
Oh, but I would say that it's not religion. It's that we justify rights, and we talked about morals and ends in itself. We justify rights through a process of a belief or an abstract right. Religion can be one of these, but it's any belief structure that we have hierarchies or any value entail then that we can either enforce or have some contractarian base. I'm getting too fucking abstract again, aren't I?
Well, no. I mean, well, yes, you are. But I mean, I get the point. And it's, look, we have to make up like hierarchies. We have to make up some sort of order that exists or is supposed to exist in order to justify this thing. But I think when we just look at the reality of it, the reality of it is biology. I mean, we have no more right to life than whales. I mean, there is no reason why we should have more right to life than whales.
And now I would say you're confusing the is and oughts, because yes, by the areas that we define biologically of consciousness as the whale is, it should have the Cartesian means causally or whatever thing. But then I would look at you and go, yeah, but Icelanders kill 900 whales a year. They sure as shit don't kill 900 people. So why is that coming about?
Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It does matter.
No, it doesn't, because they don't kill people because they would go to jail. That's the only reason why they don't kill people.
There you got it. You got it right there.
So going to jail is a matter of laws. It's not a matter of
So just so I
Right,
understand,
that's very much the Hobbesian argument, but the basis of that is that you can prove you're alive.
if I may, are you saying that the only reason people don't kill other people is because it's against the law?
No, I'm saying.
No, I think he was asking me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, well, my point is that
Help me
Frank was saying
distinguish
did-
between
did
what
not
you
prove
said
that
and
they
that.
were rights.
Okay.
That was my point. I mean, my question really is, don't look at this even as a debate. It's either we have rights or we don't have rights. Okay. The question I'm proposing here is simply, where do these rights come from? Right.
Oh,
I think
That's
because
easy.
I cannot answer that question, I think that we don't have rights, because I really can't. I mean, if I were a religious man and if I believed that God gave us those God-given rights, I could say that, yes, those rights are natural and the laws reflect that. The Constitution reflects that. The civil law reflects that. Common law reflects that. Criminal law reflects that. Whatever kind of law you're mentioning reflects that. But I do not believe that that comes from God in the first place, right?
Well,
I think
if
the
I can-
question is, I'm sorry, but I was going to say, I think the question is, without religion, is there a system of ethics that can be justified by logic alone? And even if
Yes.
that is
Absolutely.
no, even if the answer
Absolutely.
is no, it doesn't
Yes.
mean we have to give up on it. So David, you think the answer is yes?
Yes,
I know the
absolutely.
answer is right. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, I was having a discussion about morality and ethics with a friend of mine, and they threw the question to me: without religion, or without God or the Bible, where does our morality come from? And my reply was, it comes from us.
Yes.
It always
Yeah.
has.
Oh, yeah.
Sing it, Voltaire.
I like it.
Well, but that's the problem that I think that's a problem, that it comes from us, because we cannot justify that some things are right and some things are wrong just because we believe that, so it cannot come from us, essentially. I mean, it would have to come from somewhere else. We cannot say that something is right or wrong and say that because we say that, that is the case. I mean, that is not the
I'm
good
not
faith.
But let me
I'm
phrase
not
this to you
suggesting
logically.
that something is
Oh,
right
sorry.
or wrong because somebody says it is. That sounds like the Spanish Inquisition to me.
Mm.
Well, so what are we saying?
Why is killing wrong?
Okay. The thing is, let me express this logically. If I used the logical proposition, in my opinion, killing is right, you could not argue against me. There's no truth or false value to that, simply because I qualified it in my opinion. There is no area to argue it. It's metaphysical. It's on my belief. So the idea that just because it comes from our belief is not significant, that's total bullshit. Our beliefs are the basis for the scientific method, mathematics, justice, everything that comes afterwards. So
Well, you cannot justify that something is right or wrong because
justifying has nothing to do with it. Justifying is an area of evidence, and this is belief which can be deductive, which we went off of consciousness to understand its significance from Kant all the way to Nagel. Okay, so
so I keep asking. So what in what way can we deduct that? In what way can we prove that there are in
there
fact?
is no proof of it. The simple area is that it is as it is metaphysical.
Well, Bruno, I think I kind of have an idea of how we might be able to salvage this. So David was talking about how morality comes from us, and then you were saying that's kind of circular. Because let's say, for example, slavery. We used to have slavery 200 years ago. We did it, right? So if morality comes from us, you might say that means slavery is moral. However, and here's my kind of way to salvage it. My way to kind of save it is that we can point out inconsistencies with our own self. So what we can do is we can say, we do slavery. However, Abraham Lincoln actually pointed out this analogy. So we would justify slavery often in a racist way by saying that the slaves were less intelligent than us. But Abraham Lincoln, he said, what about someone way more intelligent than me? Could they make me their slave? And he said, we don't do that. Therefore, we shouldn't make African American slaves. So it's a way of being consistent
Well,
with ourselves.
in fact, you remember I'm not a Star Trek fan, I watch it when I can, but I liked Gene Roddenberry's universe, and you remember they had one of these rules about interacting with sentient beings on a planet that had not discovered warp drive. The prime directive or something like
Prime
that.
Directive.
They
could
wouldn't
not
interact with it. And I wonder if, in answer to Fermi, if we are being avoided because of the way we treat each other and the way we treat other conscious beings on our planet. That until we draw the circle around all the consciousness on this planet, the galactic empire won't contact us. I'm not suggesting that that's the case. I'm just posing that as a what if.
It's certainly
Well,
possible, but not necessary.
Well, if I can tie this together back to Bruno's question, is that if we take Hobbes' argument, yes, it all starts with the right to life. And the right to life matters because I can perceive myself as alive. And if I'm dead, well, I can't perceive myself as alive.
Yep.
That was Hobbes' basis argument. So from that, he built off of this idea that, well, how do we protect the right to life in a state of anarchy or the state of nature, as he calls it? Yes, you can say you have a right to life, but it can be taken at any time on any reason. Is that we endow essentially the Leviathan, the state, exists to protect the right to life, and we agree to that because we want to protect our right to life.
His basic
Now,
premise
Locke-
was go. I'm sorry.
Right. Now, Locke takes us further, or he basically started saying that, well, this is kind of an innate right that comes from some deity.
Yeah.
And if we look at what's going on kind of roughly still at the same time, well, Locke was an empiricist too. And kind of one of the basis of empiricism about the question of whether we exist or not was this idea that existence is ultimately only dependent upon the observer. And in this case, well, if I just close my eyes, does that mean nothing exists? No, he says basically it still exists because of God. And that's the idea that then the right to life comes from God. Now, whether you believe God or not, we can actually take God out of the equation. Is just basically saying that we agree that we want to live. So therefore, that is a right. So therefore, we agree to a structure of government that basically allows us to live, or at least allows us to live as long as due process is guaranteed.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of logical growth of where rights essentially start from just this one basis that's saying, well, I exist. I want to keep on existing.
Well, in summation, Hobbes's entire argument was, to phrase it very simply, was he said, you have two people who say, I have the right to this thing, and a person that says, I have the right to this thing, and they contradict each other. And he says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a third party that's like the big bully of the area, or has a gun or something, that he can basically said, you two get along, otherwise I'm going to shoot both of you. It's basically what Hobbes basically said, or I'm going to kick both your asses. That was the Leviathan. He was basically saying the state exists basically to keep people in an area. Leviathan is the term he used biblically because he said it's going to be something so big, something so over the top powerful that no one would even dare challenge it in the first place. And because they're in this area where someone's enforcing these laws upon them continuously, they will say, well, I'm going to respect your right because I don't want what happened to whoever to happen to me. Is what Hobbes was pessimistic and as shit.
I'm a little more optimistic than I think. In some ways,
Well, the thing is, I would say history has proved Hobbes, not Locke, in many ways, right. Unfortunately, is the thing.
But Locke was aware of Hobbes. See, people put Locke and Hobbes in opposition. They're not necessarily.
Actually, it would be Rousseau and Hobbes.
Yeah, Rousseau is definitely. Rousseau said we can basically.
We can all get along. We don't need any of this.
There's definitely a difference between us wanting something and that's something actually existing. So it is desirable. I'm not saying that it's not desirable for us to pretend that the right to life exists. You know, in many ways, that's what society is, and I think we should change to that subject now, Sashir. But about what society entails. But just to make this clear, I'm not saying that we shouldn't pretend that the right to life exists. I mean, that is the basis of society. The basis of society is that a bunch of people pretend that the right to life exists. Another thing is to truly believe that the right to life exists because God says so, or because of some other reason. Because at the end of the day, I mean, the right to life really doesn't exist for us more than it exists for a chimpanzee. We're built in pretty much the same way, except that we're a little bit smarter and not as furry. But other than that, I mean, we're very, very similar.
If I can bring this back to an earlier point, though, this is the problem where I'm saying if we talk about, even if we take the very basic right to life or right to existence, we perceive that in a certain way because we're human. Whether we can say that, let's say octopi, we discover octopi, they're extremely intelligent. We know they're intelligent already, but let's say for whatever reason, there's a species of octopi that can exist outside of water and develop technology. And at that point, if we see them building technology, it's kind of hard to say, well, these aren't sentient, intelligent beings. And if we say, okay, well, we're going to give them rights, their perception of rights, of even the right to life, yes, they say we exist, we live, we see humans exist, they live. That doesn't necessarily mean we're all going to get along.
Yep.
Because the nature of how they decide, well, we can't live in a human world, so we're going to start making the world more like octopi, and we already do that.
In nature, people are not supposed to get along, right? I mean, the law of nature, really, the way we're built is the strongest, dominate the weak, and the big animals eat the small animals. I mean,
that is the prevailing concept, but
it's wrong.
It's not wrong. It's nature. We can't attribute right or wrong to nature.
I think the forms of life. I think the forms of life that we know of have survived and flourished. Survival of the fittest, to me, does not mean survival of the strongest. If it did, tigers or sharks would rule the planet. And they don't. We do. Well, or at least we think we do.
Well, but, we are the strongest.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Let me put it this way. Dolphins are very smart. Well, I said it earlier. They're never going to send a rocket ship to another planet. And if they become able to do that, we probably won't call them dolphins then. So.
And there's one other thing I want to bring up, which I feel like often gets lost when we talk about evolution, which is that groups that cooperate often have a higher chance of surviving and living on.
Nash.
Yeah. So Frank's referencing game theory, but let's say you have two cultures, right? And in one culture, the people are vicious to one another and they're stealing and they're not getting along. You have another culture where people are cooperative, work well together. Now, let's say these two societies go to war. Which one's going to win? The society where the people cooperate with one another, or the society where the people are always stealing, not getting along? So there's this kind of group dynamic in evolution where in some ways, to some extent, we are biologically wired to get along with other people. So that there's this tension. There's the desire to get along, and then there's survival of the fittest.
We're social creatures.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, Michael. I think that's exactly why we're the strongest creatures in the planet, because we are the ones that are able to cooperate the best. We have developed the tools that allow us to cooperate better than the other animals, so we can actually kill the other animals when we see fit. and that's
right. But we do have, I mean, dogs cooperate with us. I mean, to a certain extent, all the animals we domesticated have essentially made an evolutionary deal that it's better to be with humans than they do. I mean, then we have species like rats that are incredibly successful because of us. That said, the problem is whether we cooperate with another intelligence or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's the aims of it might just be so different that just merely the exercising of rights of saying that our species has the right to procreate and has the right to expand and use up resources might just end up wiping us out, or it'd be at odds with us because we consider our species as having the right to procreate and use up resources.
Now, the thing I wanted to bring up is, Shashir, earlier you talked about octopi, and the thing is, we can look as octopi send people or become incredibly intelligent or evolve to this amazing area. The thing is, I would look at that and I would say, likely from what I've seen is we would look at them and we would go from a completely logical standpoint, they are intelligent, they are capable, they are everything, and they are not human. That's how they'd be expressive. Conjunctive, not human, categorically. And I would say, as they are not human, not sufficient area for moral analogy has been met. And it's that simple equation that defines our possibility to consciousness.
You draw the line in a very different place than I do.
I know. I do it for a lot of people.
So, Frank, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
If we were to, say, stumble across and meet, say, a powerful extraterrestrial intelligence that is superior to ours, and they express the same viewpoint towards us that we have just expressed towards animals, you're okay with that?
If they express the exact same viewpoint towards us as we express towards animals, then I think we would say their viewpoint is analogous to ours, but it is theirs, ergo it is not the same, is the problem.
But we're not going to grant you Neptunian rights because you're not Neptunian.
No. The point is
let me phrase it differently.
Okay.
If you encountered an intelligence that was an existential threat to humanity, how would you react?
I'd kill him.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think what Frank's trying to point out is that we're full of shit. I mean, these rights don't really exist. They exist when they make sense to us as humans.
I'm not. Well, but the thing is, I'm not just
real?
saying they're completely arbitrary and full of shit. Well, yes,
well,
they exist to us as we exist. We are human. That is true.
Look, if these people that not these people actually, these beings, more developed beings, looked at us the same way we looked at, like ants. They would just say, okay, so they do not have those rights. They do not have the rights that we do. They would take the same approach because it's convenient. They also probably at that point, they are a cooperative society because they're pretty developed. And the one way you cooperate, you need those rights to cooperate. We need those fictions. If we didn't have the fiction of the rights, we wouldn't be able to cooperate effectively. We wouldn't be humans, really, in the sense that we are humans that control the planet. Like we would never get to that stage. So this.
What do you mean by fictions? Can you define?
Of course, yeah. I mean, the rights are fictions. That's what I'm saying.
What are fictions?
Well, when you say you have the right to live, you are coming up with an idea that for some reason you should be able to live. That's why you're saying I have the right to live means I should be able to live, or people can't prevent me from living. This is a complete lie. I mean, if you try to
not a lie, it's completely sound.
No, it is not sound. Try to argue that with a lion. Try to argue that with a lion that you have the right to live. You have.
But I'm not arguing with a lion. I'm arguing with you on a logical basis, and that sentence is completely sound.
The fiction only works with other humans.
Fiction is only on the basis, as you call it, an abstraction. Which,
but it doesn't.
Everything is a goddamn abstraction. So.
It doesn't work with all humans, though. So if the Athenians, and this happened many times, or the Spartans, when the Spartans used to go to the other Greek towns and villages, And if the other Greeks try to argue with the Spartans that they had the right not to be enslaved, the Spartans would just laugh at them. They had no such right, just like people don't have the right not to be enslaved these days. It's a fiction that we create, and it's a very useful fiction. I mean,
It's a fiction that makes us believe something or something else, regardless of what it is. So you're saying it's an ought that we create in disregard of what actually is.
Yes, it is. It is. Yes, we create a fiction. We create a story, right?
Okay.
Does that mean that we can't create that story? No. Does that mean that the story doesn't make sense in a way? No. I mean, again, we create these fictions in order to cooperate successfully. So they make a whole lot of sense. Another thing is, do they come from God? Do they come from some, utter motive or force? I mean, no, they don't.
They come from
Well,
Frank, clearly.
Whether it's a fiction or not, it's basically the use of rights is essentially how we've constructed our society. And in that sense, there is an internal self-interest in terms of protecting my right to life, and then we can build out because I don't want it.
Absolutely, I agree.
Right, and that's right. Again, I'm willing to lay aside the question whether rights are innate or not, but if we can accept that as a part, I can accept that as a priority for the purpose to move the argument forward. My question, though, comes back to: do we say that if we encounter another intelligence that we recognize as equal or superior to ours, as saying, well, in that case, they have the same rights as us?
And is, will they think we have the same rights as them? Is the one that I'd be concerned about.
That's the thing. I would say they have their own rights, but as their own rights is of their own set, is not of our set. Okay? It is declared analogous under the abstraction of right. Fucking A. So we are not saying they have the same rights as us. We are saying they have similar rights to us because they are similar to us, but they are not us, and they are not us, how you express it. The negation is still recognized, that they are categorically different. Okay?
Now, what do you mean by recognize when you say the negation is still recognized? What do you mean by that?
Okay. The negation is still recognized on a holistic or, not reductionist, but as we recognize a thing as a set of categories or anything in its entirety that is not us or is something different.
I understand that. The word recognize connotes a recognizer. Who is the recognizer?
Us. It'd be the set that is the human or had the moral code. This is going back to an ends in ourselves from Kant and how we recognize other people to that area.
Was really disappointing.
Sorry,
until
something's
you get to
happening.
the end where Indy throws a hand.
Yeah, I hear something.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Is that Ethan?
No, that was me. It was the computer.
Yo Bambino. But the thing is, when we say people form, going back to you, Bruno, when we say people form fictions in disregard to the reality, I would look at that and I'd say justice or contracts, as they enforce justice, contractarianism from Hobbes to Locke afterwards, are absolutely fictions or abstract rights that disregard reality or deal with worst case, Hobbes especially, worst case scenarios to try to instill
I do
those
not
rights
have
in
any
them.
rights that disregard reality.
Well,
none.
That was the thing. Hobbes was basically, because he was born in the Civil War of England and seeing people do horrible things, he basically from a young age became a pacifist and was having the area of, I would do anything to any end to avoid this, what I am seeing right now. And because of that, he constructed an abstraction from just the assumption of life that he would go on to become incredibly the most influential work of jurisprudence or political science in all of academia, because he was disregarding what is for ought or an abstraction off of it.
I tell you what confuses me.
Yes.
And I don't know of any party, but you guys help me because I'm very confused.
But
and I think it's the use of the word rights that we're not fully connected on. For example, if I have some broccoli in my refrigerator and somebody breaks into my house and steals the broccoli out of the refrigerator.
Yep.
Is it my understanding that I did not have a right to the broccoli because somebody was able to infringe upon it?
No, I would look at you and I'd say, do you think you had the right to broccoli? And regardless, you could either answer yes or no.
Okay.
The things that happen afterwards.
So help me understand that in the context of the right to life.
On the right to life, as it goes off of, this infers or is implying consciousness is, in your case, as an ends in itself, that has the ability to say that I prefer to live or I prefer not to live.
I understand that. I completely understand that. My question is, if someone kills me, does that mean that I do not have the right to live?
The question at that point is moot because you're not around to tell me if you prefer to live or you prefer not to live.
Okay.
Well, David,
I'm asking the question anyway.
I think, David, so it depends on who you ask, obviously, here, because we have different opinions. So what I was saying, the way I would answer your question is that you have the right to live if we abide by the law, if we look at the law. As an American citizen, no one's allowed to kill you other than the state. So, or, in some very specific cases, self-defense.
Someone who's rich enough.
Or someone who's rich enough and has some good lawyers.
Or what if not even by the law, but what if by our consensual morality, like just the agreed upon morality?
I'm not talking about the law or consensual morality.
Well, okay, but there's different levels. So there's different.
If somebody murders me, did I have the right to live?
Well, no,
that right no longer exists because I'm murdered.
You remember when we talked about consciousness and you said you need to have the ability to doubt your own being or anything like that, or you phrased it differently, I phrased it like that. In order to doubt your own consciousness, you had to have some essence of self-awareness that could be there. And the thing I'm basically saying is when you have a right or anything that you can say that is your right, I'm saying you need to have the ability to say that is a right. It's basically, and if that person kills you, you no longer have the ability, as you are not now, you no longer have the ability to say that was your right or not. It's in essence the same way.
Okay,
David, if I can take,
I don't see that follows.
Okay,
and you correct me if I'm wrong.
Hold on a second, because I think you guys are talking about two different things. I mean,
possibly
to a certain extent, you're talking past each other. If Frank is right in terms of the basis of where we can say a right to life comes from and why we even value it. That's an internal basis because you exist and you want to keep on existing. In terms of though,
is that really what you thought the question was?
No,
right, but
no,
in terms of
something else.
But in terms of society, yes, you have a right to, whether you live or die, you have a right to life, and under the basis of society is that presumably the person who killed you will be caught and be punished. In other words, you're right, even though you're not there, will still be enforced.
So I think.
Yeah. That I understand what you're saying, but that's not the question either.
Yeah, I think
the question is, do I have a right to life?
Well, on a deep level, you don't have the right. On a deep level, you don't have the right. Like, the only thing that gives you the right is the Constitution and the law.
I disagree.
So here's the thing. I think we could say he has the right. However, I don't think we could use logic to justify it. So I think, so let's say there's all these different moral systems. Let's say there's moral system A says people have the right to live. Moral system B says, I don't know, you should try to kill as many people as possible. Moral system C says you should try to kill one person a day. So let's say you have all these different moral theories, right? We could say moral system A is the correct one that we should all abide by. We could say that. I don't think we could use logic alone to justify that.
Well,
We would have to at some point give our own preferences.
Well, I think you can if you're saying your own preference. If your own preference is you exist and you want to exist, you want to continue to exist. That is a logical argument, and from that case, you build up this construct that says,
that's still you're admitting that still is taking into account our personal preferences. That's not pure logic, right? There's input from us, right?
It's like
do you exist? Do you want to exist? If you have no preference whether you exist or not, well, I guess yes, you're right. Then there is no basis to it.
Well,
right. So we need our preferences as an input. We can't just use logic purely.
Well, that's tantamount to saying that because I want something, that something is owed to me. Yeah, and that's essentially what you're saying. Which,
well, yes. Do you
which
want
is
to
not
exist?
something you can prove logically.
Do you want to continue to exist?
Right, but because you want something that doesn't mean that you have the right to that. I mean that you having the right to something is that you are owed something. Like, who owes you this? Who owes you the right for you to live? I mean,
you do. If you want to exist, you owe it to at that point.
Oh, yourself, right? Okay, I mean,
we did just talk about freedom. Craig, did you have something to say?
We all have the right.
Craig was making antlers,
and we come together in
yes, it's Christmas time, so I have to make reindeer antlers
in order to protect those rights.
But David, my question to you is, your sort of moral framework. Do you think it can be justified by logic alone, or do you think we have to put our own preferences in some form to help justify it?
Logic and science and reasoning, but and human beings can differ about a great many things, but discussing them in a civil fashion furthers all of our knowledge, even when we disagree.
Yeah, absolutely.
The only way that it doesn't further our knowledge is if we kill each other.
But even that is a preference. Even that is a preference, right? So you're still.
It may be. Craig has a question.
Craig actually has a question for you, David. So I'll grant that you believe that you have a right to life, and I'm cool with that. How far do you push that? How far does what boundaries may be placed upon your right to life? Boundaries about, say, extraordinary medical procedures, or boundaries about when does your right to life threaten somebody else's right to life, and what boundaries are placed on it by that? And how do you decide that, and where do those boundaries come from?
I'm not going to be able to give you an answer that will be definitively decisive in all cases. I don't have that much knowledge, but I do know about me, or at least I think I do. And, if I'm sick and I need medical treatment, I'm going to use my own judgment about whether or not the person who's trying to help me can help me. I don't have the answer for everybody in every situation.
And nobody does.
And I don't think having that answer is a requirement for having some knowledge about it, But I understand your point, Craig, and just thinking about that helps all of us. I think it improves all of us. Just think about how many people don't consider that. All you have to do is stand in line at the grocery store and look at the magazines that are so popular. And
Well, it goes to the question of rights in general, right? Because one cannot have rights without having boundaries to those rights. And how are those boundaries decided? And who gets to say my right is bounded by somebody else? My right to go have dinner at a restaurant is bounded by somebody else's right to be protected from a virus by wearing a mask.
Y'all remember discussing freedom last week and the week before? We just did the Hobbesian equivalent of how he inferred or derived freedom from nothing but life. Craig actually did it, which was how we understand another person's right to life in proximity to ours, and what was the right that he then had to derive from understanding as we live beside each other in close approximation. He came up with a theory. He called it mults, which would be fines or all these other things, but it was what he called it was of commonwealth. And it was how he came to the conclusion of freedom without saying it was vouchsafed by God or given to God, but he came to it just by the theory of life in approximation to other lives.
Okay.
This is
just to provide a little bit of an answer to Craig. Okay, there's the limits on my rights are other people's rights. That's why we engage in societies and governments, in my opinion. And everybody doesn't live by that strictly or well, but we have systems in place to deal with that. They're not perfect. They need improving, but they're better than they used to be. A lot better than they used to be.
But yeah, I guess I'm sorry to kind of beat this horse dead, but like logic by itself doesn't have a preference. Like logic doesn't care if humanity exists. It doesn't care if dogs and cats exist. Logic is just logic. So logic can't, in and of itself, prove any claim saying that humans should exist, humans shouldn't exist, humans should treat each other well, humans should treat each other badly. Logic
unless it's assumed with transitive values, it can do it in that case.
Or unless you consider logic as a human construct also.
I guess so. But normally we think like
Plato.
Pure logical arguments are cold and neutral. They don't have a preference on whether people are treated good, bad, whether humanity does or doesn't exist. So just using reason by itself can't get to a claim, in my opinion, that I should exist. We would need some kind of personal...
Yes, it can.
But logic has to start from a point. With any logical problem, you start with some basic axioms. I mean,
it could just be symbols. It could
no,
be.
That's mathematics. You're thinking.
I'm going to let everybody else.
No, mathematics is the language of logic. We need
basically the logical area. It comes from the area with your. In regards to you, Michael, on preference is if I on existence I could, and I actually discussed this with some friends today. Was if I apply quantity, I can use first order logic to use an existential or unique existential quantifier onto it. That is that at least one thing exists in the system, or exactly one thing exists in the system, and I totally can express that. And as to value or qualia on that system, if I have transitive value, I totally can express it on the grounds that is greater than, less than, or that is better than, less than. And so as long as I keep it consistent, I totally can express that in a logical system. So
you lost me.
But it would just be
you totally lost me.
Well, yeah, I know. Frank, that usually happens.
I'm a little bit lost.
I would add to what you said, Michael. Logic cannot prove what's not right.
Yes, it can.
Not good logic.
Oh, it's excellent logic.
No, logic cannot prove anything that is not contained in its assumptions.
I mean,
That's the
no,
problem.
mathematics is off assumptions. That's Euclid's theory from 300 BCE.
I
It comes
think
off of how we
you
go on.
are not correct there, Mr.
No, logic is on the basis of clarity in any given. It isn't mathematics and logic. Yes, logic is the tool to mathematics, but logic goes off of clarity, where mathematics goes off assumptions from Euclid's theorem in
No.
BC off the axioms.
No. Mathematics goes off of logical clarity
Yes,
just as much as philosophical logic
it
goes
does.
off of
Yeah,
logical
I feel we need
clarity.
Quan here.
No, I
don't try
discussed
to
this
sell
with
me
Quan
that
the earlier
bill,
day.
Diggs.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, you're the proxy for Quan. That's what you're claiming.
But I want to give David a chance to respond to what I said. So David, what do you think about the point I made? What's your take on it? Do you agree with it, or do you have reservations?
Okay, remind me again.
That logic in and of itself is indifferent to humanity.
Yeah, I remember now. Sorry.
Oh, it's all good.
I don't know that there's anything that anybody has all the answers to. That there's ever any one definitive thing that somebody can say that would persuade another person that logic alone can lead us to the proper conclusion. However, humanity is making progress. To me, we have better governments than we used to have. In the year 1900, 75% of people in the world could not read. In 2020, 75% of the world, or more than 75%, can read. Now, that's progress. Somewhere between 25% and 75% is at least improvement. To me, the logical world, the world of rights, of morality, of ethics, is not digital. It's not none or all. It's a spectrum in between. And I think we are progressing.
David, to show you just a problem with the metric read, you should know that when the Soviet Union, before it was conceived, less than 10% of that. This is to show you how metrics can affect things and how we assume them and to measure things. Less than 10% of those people could read before the inception of the Soviet Union. But after 50 years of it, you had almost a 98% literacy rate. And we would say that as progress, but that's completely disconcerting. The amount of, 20 million people that died in the gulags, the areas that happened, with all the oppression from that would happen from the secret police or the areas or anything. When we decry that as that is progression, usually we turn a blind eye to everything that is now the possibility of that thing that we are going on.
You're losing me again.
I know I do that all the time.
Sure. I don't think we have time today, but
no, that's fine. I was gonna say I'm gonna get going because I got some food waiting for me.
Yeah, nice.
I got some Indian food, so I'm looking forward.
I wish I had some Indian food, man. I'm gonna.
I got some
from a package or something.
Some palak paneer and some chapati.
So that sounds great, and I'm very jealous now. But what? So just give us a teaser for next week. Next week, let's start with your question. So is it why do civilizations fall? Is that the question that you want to discuss?
Yeah. I don't know if you want to do it next week. That's Christmas Eve
not next week.
or Christmas Day.
Is it Chris? Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Not that it matters at this point. In 2020, every day could be Christmas and no days could be Christmas. It's just it's completely.
That's a good point. I mean, we'll skip next week, so the week after that. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So, why do civilizations fall? Is that the question that you want to?
Oh yeah. No,
okay.
Sure.
Well, that's a very interesting.
I've been
We'll
about.
we'll try to do some research. Any
I-
final remarks?
No.
Well, thank
Yeah, and I feel like what David said, I 100% agree with, and that it so basically we don't have to use only logic. We can use a combination of logic and our own personal preferences, and I think that's the best way to get to make moral progress. But
Well, I think
we
you
mix
can't just use logic. You can't have a logical proof. You have mathematical proofs using logic. You don't have that.
well, like you could say if A, then B, not B.
That's the point of the
therefore-
assumptions.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I just want to say that I'm in complete agreement with David. Just so I don't drag it on too long. Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, have a good night, guys.
All right, guys.
All right, good
Thank you
night.
so much for coming. Have a
Thanks.
good dinner, Sashir, and
Thanks.
everybody. And thank you so much for taking the time. And
No,
whoever's
it's
listening to
it's
us,
always fun.
thank you so much for
Good,
listening.
good COVID activity.
All right.